Good afternoon.
Yes.
If y'all
Yeah.
will take a seat, we'll get started.
I can. Sure. That'd be great. That's what we do.
This is
Everybody's
the
cards.
Arizona Public University and how cities and towns can leverage their strategic
Stay
partnerships.
tuned. I'll give you one. These are all other people.
We will have this going approximately an hour and 30 minutes. My name is Lana Mook. I'm the mayor of the city of El Mirage, and I'll be presenting here. Let me introduce the participants here. Our speakers are Jonathan Koppel. He's the Dean of College of Public Service and Community Solutions at Arizona State University. And Jeffrey Silvertooth, Dr. Jeffrey, and he's Associate Dean, University of Arizona. And is it Andrea or Andrea?
Andrea.
Andrea Whitsett, Director, Morrison Institute for Public Policy at Arizona State University. You know, all of us, regardless of where we live in the state of Arizona, are familiar with U of A and ASU, but you might not be aware of the services they can provide and the partnerships they have with cities and towns. Our panel today will give a brief overview of how your city or town can partner with and utilize the resources offered by our two largest universities. Who wants to go first?
I think Dr. Silvertooth is kicking
Okay. Doctor.
as our guest in Phoenix. How about that?
Thank you very much. It's always a very welcoming, hospitable environment here. I appreciate that. It is a pleasure to be here today, and I very much appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to participate and join you this afternoon for this discussion and speak on one of my favorite topics, and that is cooperative extension and the land grant mission. I know you all didn't come here to take a quiz today, but just for the sake of interest, how many of you, just by quick show of hands, how many of you are familiar with the land grant institution, the land grant institution concept? Very good. Excellent. Excellent. How many, on the other hand, are familiar with cooperative extension specifically? Very good. Okay. Very good. Thank you. This is what I have been invited to speak to today, is the land grant institution and cooperative extension and what we're here to do and how it fits in with your missions in your communities. And there is a very logical and tight symmetry between the two. Just as a little bit of history to kind of put things in historical proper context. If you go back to the land grant institution formation, it was actually signed into law with the Morrill Act by Abraham Lincoln on the 2nd of June in 1862. And that's a significant piece of legislation that formed public institutions in every state and territory in the United States. And there was land set aside by the federal government to provide that in a line of mission-oriented support to do so. Now, it's interesting, you look back at that too, and you think that was a pretty interesting time to be thinking about the development of the nation, development of public institutions and higher education. 1862, June. It was probably one of the darkest days of the Republic. If you're thinking about things on the federal side, the Union Army was losing one battle after the other. The Confederates were pressing in on Washington. They were pretty dark days, and Lincoln's administration was not viewed upon in a very favorable way because of the poor successes they've been having against the rebellion in the Civil War. Yet the 37th Congress had the capacity to look ahead and think in a forward-thinking way. There must have been some line of confidence that they had that they would somehow come through these storms, and they passed 4 really landmark pieces of legislation in that legislative session. The Morrill Act, of course, being significant in that they developed, provided for the foundation for the development of these land grant public institutions. Second, they passed the Homestead Act, which most of us in the West are very familiar with in terms of opening up the West. The third act they passed was the Pacific Railroad Act. They subsidized and worked in partnership with private industry and development of the railroads connecting the West to the eastern part of the United States. So those 3 are fundamental pieces of legislation, very forward-thinking for a growing, developing nation, recognizing education and commerce and economic development was going to be necessary if we opened up and expanded into the Western territories after, of course, the war. The fourth piece of legislation they passed, you might debate with wisdom in that, but they passed monetary action, the U.S. Monetary Act, and that actually formed the IRS and formed the first time the federal government issued paper money. That was in 1862, but the Morrill Act began then. Now, the Morrill Act, you think about it, it's really a Jeffersonian, and not a Jeff Silvertooth Jeffersonian kind of concept, but Thomas Jefferson, in that he had written in the early days of the Republic about the importance of having an educated populace. If we're going to have a democratic republic, which is still an experiment in the civilized history of this planet, if we're going to have a successful democratic republic, we need an educated populace that's going to pitch in and vote on and make decisions about the direction of the nation. And at the time, higher education was primarily restricted to the elite. Yeah, and they're very wealthy, and oftentimes they went to Europe for, esoteric types of education. Thomas Jefferson had the idea that we needed public education as a kind of a revolutionary concept that would provide educational access to the common people, just to the average American, not just the wealthy and the elite. That was really unheard of at that time almost anywhere in the world. And it wasn't really put into action and begin to come to fruition until 1862 with the passage of the Morrill Act. So there's a foundation that goes back to Thomas Jefferson's early writings and speeches and thoughts on the diffusion of knowledge and the development of this republic. In 1862, it was put into action with the Morrill Act for a land-grant institution in every state and territory. Arizona received the same opportunity as we became a territory, and the University of Arizona was formed with that land-grant mission. The land-grant mission, basically, you can look at the whole Morrill Act and look at the overall construct, but it's basically and essentially what I still part of my mantra today in our mission in cooperative extension as a part of a land-grant institution. It is to bring the university to the people and bring science to bear on practical problems. And as those land-grant institutions began to develop, they began to take on this interconnectedness with the public in a very open way, not just in terms of resident education, but the faculty and staff from the universities began to reach out into the state and territories they were working in and began working with people on practical problems. In 1887, the Hatch Act was passed to complement the land-grant mission and the Morrill Act that formed experiment stations. Now, we had pretty much an agrarian community in those days, so the foundations of these institutions was agriculture and engineering, and the basic sciences to support agriculture and engineering. And so those experiment stations were then allocated land from the federal government to conduct this type of applied research for the support agronomic and basically agrarian type economic development. Then in 1914, Woodrow Wilson signed the Smith-Lever Act on the 8th of May 1914. The Smith-Lever Act formally constructed a cooperative extension system in conjunction with the land-grant institutions. It had already been taking place, but this formally mandated the formation of the cooperative extension system with every land-grant institution. Again, it was central to the mission and the plan of connecting the university to the people of the state and bringing science to bear on practical problems. In Arizona, of course, we just became a state in 1912, and we had already started with some extension operations, but the University of Arizona had its ratification and a formalization of cooperative extension in 1914. Since then, we've been operating. We just celebrated our 100th anniversary, our centennial, 4 years ago. And of all the changes that have taken place in the state, both economically and socially, the demographics have shifted and changed. We have changed, and that is cooperative extension, and university has changed and evolved along the way, along with them. And one thing that has stayed consistent, though, is we're still today, here in 2018, still doing, society's changed, the needs have changed, but we're still fundamentally doing what we originally set out to do, or the institution set out to do 104 years ago, and that is to bring the university to the people and bring science to bear on practical problems. Cooperative extension means it's a cooperative arrangement between the federal government, the state government, and the state land-grant institutions, and the counties, the cooperative arrangement. And so it's a three-way arrangement, it's a partnership. Everyone has some skin in the game. As a result of that, we have faculty and staff associated with the University of Arizona in cooperative extension in every county and every part of the state. We have faculty in every academic unit in our College of Agricultural Life Sciences and several other colleges on campus. We have faculty and staff at cooperative extension associated with our offices that are located in conjunction with the county governments in every county in the state. Right here in Maricopa County, Dr. Ed Martin is sitting back in the back of the room with us today, and he's the director for Maricopa County Cooperative Extension. Our offices are down on Broadway. And we also have faculty and staff on every one of our experiment stations. We're conducting the applied translational research for this side of the organization, the university, and we're extending that information into the state. So through this network of cooperative relationships of federal, state, and county operations, we have a home base with people living and working in the communities all across the state. Now, there's a little genius to that in my view. It's a Hearts and Minds program. And it's the people that we have working in Extension that work in these communities, they take on the complexion of those communities. When we all get together as an organization, which we seldom do because of the 700 people scattered across the state, it's difficult to do. We come together, and I experience as the director the interesting mosaic that we have of all the communities in the state, from our reservations to our large cities, our small towns, the rural areas, the full mix. And the folks in the organization bring that flavor from across the state into this organization, and we have this kind of cross-pollination that way. But that's good because we need to always be able to respond to what are the needs in the community. It's important for us in the delivery of our mission to go to the communities and not say, we know what you need and we're this eminent intellectual power and we're going to solve your problems. But rather, what we're here to do is to say, what do you need? What are your issues? What are your challenges? And what can we do to work with you? And remembering, too, that we are the portal of the university to these communities. Now, we're not going to say ever we have all the problems, we have all the solutions to all the problems, we have all the answers. But we can say this. When we are confronted with the issues and problems, the challenges that we face in communities across the state, we make an effort to help you and become a partner. And that's the way I like to describe it. We have a partnership with federal, county, and state entities. Most importantly, we have a partnership with the people in the communities. And this is about relationships. And you find that when you're working in communities, and I have actually, I should have started this by saying I've been in Arizona. I'm an agronomist myself. I count time and seasons, so it's 32 years. I've been in Arizona 32 seasons. And I started out working in Extension as making an honest living before I became an administrator, and working in the field, working around the state. And I've seen it happen firsthand, and I see it happen today. And that's my motivation as a director to serve administratively, probably similar to a lot of you who are serving your communities in public service capacities, and that is to try to do some good, deliver on some positive, constructive elements that can help people in communities solve problems and address basic needs. And when I see this, the capacity we have in the state to connect up to the university, the applied research and the education we have, good things can happen, but they don't always happen fast. To speak of our programs, too, I should say we have a broad portfolio of programs that consist of agriculture and natural resources, and that extends from horticulture and master gardeners all the way to crop production systems, ranching systems, watershed management, water resources, et cetera, et cetera. We have a large segment of our programs in family, consumer, health sciences, and those are primarily in nutritional education programs, health and nutrition, and also early childhood development. Outstanding programs across the state in what we call FCHS, Family, Consumer, Health Sciences. And then probably one of the most popular program areas that we have, particularly in communities around the state, is 4-H youth development. And I've had a lot of county supervisors that we work with in partnership across the state say to me when we're facing issues of challenge and where to distribute resources, do all that you can for our communities, but most importantly, do things for our kids. And as a father of 4 kids that have successfully grown up despite their old man, I can relate to that very easily and say that that's something that's ubiquitous in all communities, whether it's a rural community, an urban community, or some subset thereof. People want to do things for the youth in terms of educational development. And we're unique in that respect with the 4-H youth development programs. Kind of a myth that sometimes goes on with 4-H is people sometimes think that you have to raise a pig or have a calf to be in 4-H. You know, that's not true at all. There's some outstanding urban-related programs. Basically, it's a STEM education program, a science, technology, education and math program. That's basically what we're doing. Matter of fact, if you go into display room this afternoon. There's an excellent booth. It's a fab lab, a fabrication lab, where there are three-dimensional entities that are being drawn up and constructed in plastic form with this instrumentation that we have in the fab lab based in Navajo County, but we'd like to get one in every county in the state, but it's an example. It's a good example of the types of STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math that are being delivered to the youth of this state through these 4-H youth development programs. So again, we don't have all the answers to all the problems, but we can recognize the problems with you, and then we can do what we can to partner with communities to bring that education and science to bear on the practical problems. If you look on our website, you'll find a mission that's stated to say we're here to conduct applied research and education to improve the lives of individuals, families, communities, and the environment in Arizona and beyond. So it's probably won't walk out of remembering that, but you can remember this. We're here with a mission to bring the university to the people and bring science to bear on practical problems. And I'm proud of the way we do it. We're also probably the best kept secret in the state, in that some folks that know about us work with us a lot. But I go around the state, and when I'm in this community in a cafe or working someplace, and somebody wants to know what you do. What are you doing here? Well, I work at the university. Oh yeah, what do? You with the football team or with anything like that? You have tickets? No. I tell them I work with Extension, and they usually don't know what that is. But quite often they'll have some kind of maybe Green Acres, Hank Kimball kind of picture of the world, which is a comedian. But it's one of our challenges, and that's why I'm delighted to be here today and appreciate this opportunity to speak to and help communicate our message, what we're here to do. And we're already connected in your communities. It's not like something we can come out there. We'll send someone out, but we're already there. And if you need expertise from the campus, we can connect in right away, immediately. But we're right there. We have folks that are embedded in your communities, and you might pass them in the grocery store and never know it. But I'd like to introduce you to them if you don't know them. And again, I thank you for the time and pleasure to be here. And if there are any questions that we have, Hannah, either now or later on in the program, however you'd like to do that, I'm delighted to entertain the questions and discussion that we might be able to generate here this afternoon.
Well, why don't we finish with the speakers, and then we'll go to questions.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Jonathan, you want to
Great.
go next?
Hi, my name is Jonathan Coppell. I'm Dean of the College of Public Service and Community Solutions at ASU, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be with you, and thank you for the setup, because, by the way, the quiz, you're going to all be responsible for all of the dates that doctors. So I hope you all know when the Moral Act was passed. I'm particularly delighted to be here with my colleague. I'm sorry that our friends from NAU are not here, because we're blessed as a state to have three state universities that I think are all committed to our public purpose. And a lot of times people think of a public university meaning it gets some money from the state, and that's what means it's public. Well, first of all, the amount of money that universities get from the state has dwindled dramatically. But I actually think that the less important aspect of public in our university title is the money, and more about the mission. And so this idea that we exist to serve the public interest is absolutely fundamental to how we see ourselves, just as how the U of A sees itself, and I think also to how NAU sees itself. And in many ways, ASU views ourselves as a land-grant institution in spirit. In fact, I'd say that very much the challenge for ASU, and I think people are familiar, we talk about ourselves and are recognized as being innovative and doing things differently. What drives us is, in some sense, the question, what does it mean to be a modern land-grant institution? What does it mean to serve the public interest in 2018? So part of the answer to that question is, who are we existing to serve? And so I'll use the College of Public Service, which I have the privilege to lead, to exemplify some of the broader points about ASU. Andrea Whitsitt is director of our Morrison Institute for Public Policy. She'll talk a little bit about some of the specific ways in which the Morrison Institute can be of service to your communities. But we'll wrap up in some sense by talking about the broader ASU purpose, because like Jeffrey said, there's a plethora of programs that I think can be of use to you, and I'd like to sort of brainstorm with you about what those collaborations can be. And I'll give you some concrete examples which I think will get your gears turning. But the first thing in talking about the mission is that and this is our college's mission, but it's very much an extension of the university. And again, it's very similar to what was just articulated. We exist to solve problems. The first problem is, are we providing educational opportunities for all of our citizens? And so one answer to that is to look at the population that we serve, and we're very proud as a university that our student population now looks like the population of our state. So if you asked this question 30 years ago, you would have found an entirely unrepresentative population, heavily overrepresented towards people with an income that was at the median or above, almost entirely unrepresentative of the racial and ethnic diversity of our state, and generally not representative of the demographics of our state from a rural and urban point of view. That's completely different today. Our college in some ways exemplifies that. The majority of our students are first-generation college students. It so happens that the majority of our students are transfer students, so we work very well with our community college partners, obviously Maricopa Community College, but also Pima, and community colleges around the state. And what we've tried to do is to create pathways for students so that the education meets them where they are. By the way, part of the reason for creating online programs is to allow people in rural communities outside of Phoenix and Tucson and so on to access the university, and we've created partnerships with community colleges all around the state, including tribal colleges, to bring the curriculum to those places, to make the whole state feel like they have access to the university without leaving their community and moving to the state of Maricopa. But here I think is the more important point, and I don't want to repeat what Dr. Silvertooth said. What I thought would be useful is to talk a little bit about how you go from the idea that the university might be of service to creating tangible partnerships, tangible projects that bring the capacity of the university to bear on the challenges that you're facing. And I'll use examples that come from the College of Public Service and Community Solutions because they're the ones I know best, but it's also been the mission of this college for many years to be of service to the cities and towns of Arizona. And I'll tell you a funny story. So I'm now a native Arizonan, but 10 years ago I wasn't. When I first got here, and I was leading the School of Public Affairs, and many of you may be familiar with the School of Public Affairs, many of you may be graduates, because a lot of the town and city managers and county managers in Arizona came up to me and said, you know, I have an MPA from ASU, from your school. And in fact, when I went to the ACMA meetings and so on, like 70% of the people told me that. And it was quite moving to see what a tangible effect a school can have on a state in that one dimension of educating people. But we've built the college now around partnering with communities to solve problems. And let me just give a couple of examples. It's sort of awkward, so I'll use this screen. But we work with the Department of Corrections and a lot of county jails to work on the reduction of recidivism. How do you create second chance centers, which the Department of Corrections is boosting right now? How do you create employment opportunities for people coming out of jail and prison? Because after all, if they're not employed, the likelihood of repeat offending goes dramatically up. And that's a huge problem for communities around the state. How do you use sports as a way of engaging young people? How do you provide educational opportunities, not just in college, but beyond? So we provide certified public manager training. Again, many of your colleagues in city and town and county government may have a CPM from our Ramsey Center. Instead of only doing that here, we've offered that program in southern Arizona. We've offered it in northern Arizona to come to your community where you need it, and we'd be happy to work with you on putting together a program that meets the needs of your community where you are. A lot of the most challenging problems are not solved by us doing a research study and publishing a journal article and it sits on a shelf. That's entirely uninteresting to us. We're more interested in working together with community partners, and that only works if you folks are identifying the problems and calling us and saying, hey, we've got something. Is there anything you guys can bring to bear on that? So I'll tell you right now, my email address. I'm not kidding when I say you call us. My email address is Koppell, Koppell, at asu.edu, and I give this out, and people actually email me and say, here's our thing. So I mean that seriously. So, for example, tourism is a big issue everywhere in Arizona. It's the biggest industry in our state. We've worked with communities from Greenlee to, I met a gentleman from Sierra Vista to Winslow, all over the state, saying, let's do an inventory of the assets in your community and let's come up with a plan that makes sense. And let's not do so with the exact same plan that the community down the road has without consulting with them. Right? Not every city in Arizona can exist on the exact same economic model. It doesn't make any sense. So we have to think about a coordinated approach in these things, and let us play a role in bringing those parties together, which is not always so easy to do. Let us do the market research, and the best part from our point of view is we're serving a public need, and our students are learning, and it's giving an opportunity to benefit the community. So we've done projects like that in a variety of areas. I want to pick out one that make sense. So, for example, the one on the upper corner about domestic violence. So this is a scourge around the state. Domestic violence often tied to drug abuse. We are working with partner public safety agencies and social service agencies to create interventions before the problem gets out of control. Again, students learning in partnership with faculty, in partnership with law enforcement and social service agencies to create interventions that yield results. And the great part about a university, and this in some ways is a direct application of the agricultural extension model in social realms, in economic realms, in governance realms, we learn from the experience of working with partners to solve problems. So you don't just keep applying the same thing without learning. We learn together, and we benefit from that. Our students benefit from it, and our state benefits from that as well. One of the most interesting aspects of the work that we do is that they're not constrained to urban areas, and I want to highlight this point because I think there's a perception that the universities are largely focused on the metropolitan areas. And if we have terrific partnerships in the city of Phoenix, of course. We have students embedded in the city in virtually every department. We have partnerships with the county, whether it comes to employing young people who are disengaged or it comes to providing better services to homeless populations. That is a huge part of what we do. At the same time, we're engaged all over the state. So, for example, our Lodestar Center for Nonprofit Leadership and Philanthropy is working with small towns all around Arizona to help build capacity of nonprofit and non-governmental organizations so that they're in a better position to serve their own communities. And that's part of what we consider our extension in a non-agricultural way. We're working with tribal communities all around Arizona to figure out where their economic opportunities are and how youth can be educated and create opportunities on the reservation in those communities so that people don't have to leave in order to find a more prosperous future. As I mentioned our tourism work. We have a Center for Sustainable Tourism that's been doing research in this area for years. We do work, and Andrea will talk about it, on water policy and how do you resolve the dilemma of water use and preservation and development in communities that live and die by water availability. And finally, I'll mention that we've been working with Arizona Town Hall, which I suspect a lot of people in this room are familiar with, to come up with a different model where instead of meeting once a year or twice a year, the Arizona Town Hall is a dynamic process by which communities are gathered all around the state on a regular basis to create voices for different constituencies, feeding into one aggregate voice for the people of Arizona, not just in the legislature, but in the business community and more broadly. As a general point, I would ask you to think about what an institution like ASU or the other universities, but what an institution like ASU might be able to bring to bear on the challenges that you are facing on a daily basis. So whether it's how to get businesses to locate to your community, or how to get young people to see their future within your community, or how to get government to function more effectively, or how to get better connection to federal resources that might be steered to your community, or how to get businesses to relocate to your community, any of those questions, we have capacity that could be tapped into, and we'd like to be creative in thinking through what that collaboration would look like. And Andrea will talk specifically about the Morrison Institute, because I think that's directly addressing the public policy dimension of this, and then I'll wrap up by pointing to some of the other parts of our university.
Thank you. Well, as Jonathan said, I'm Andrea Whitsett and director of ASU Morrison Institute. It is a pleasure to be here. I know some of you and look forward to connecting with more of you at the end of the session. Lovely venue, although it will be a miracle if I can find where I parked at the end of this. So just out of curiosity, how many of you are familiar with the work of Morrison Institute? So I know how much background to give. Great. So we are actually celebrating our 36th year, which is exciting to think of how long we've been around and having an impact on the state. And it's interesting to me always when I think about how much ASU's mission and charter has actually come into even better alignment with the longtime position of Morrison Institute around the need to reach out, to do applied research, and to have that focus on social engagement and embeddedness. The Institute was founded with a gift from Marvin and June Morrison and their son Richard Morrison of Gilbert, Arizona. Richard in particular has remained very involved. In fact, I was just sitting down talking with him yesterday in an executive committee meeting. And they created the Institute with the idea that the state was really lacking at the time an independent think tank that could provide objective information, not just for policymakers, but really for all residents of the state. And so when people ask, what are some of the areas that you work in, it's this broad, as you can see on the slide. And so if it impacts the quality of life for Arizonans, we're willing to do research in that space. So we're having a sustained focus on the 7 items you see listed here, things like the state's changing demographics. When people ask me, especially as the newly kind of appointed director, what do I see as the core issues that I anticipate us having a very sustained focus on, the 3 that always come to mind for me: water policy. You'll see we house the Kyle Center for Water Policy. Secondly, I would say education policy, where we've had a lot of work come out over the years, oftentimes including about half an hour ago when I was chatting with someone up here, people will allude to the 5 shoes waiting to drop report because of the deep impact it made on Arizonans at the time of its release. And I think the third one I would say is issues around governance and our changing electorate. And I'll get into a little more detail on those areas. To come back for a moment to the Kyle Center for Water Policy, Sarah Porter is the director of that center. She's very accessible. If you're looking to connect, she has incredible depth of knowledge in that space. The work of the Kyle Center has largely, in its first few years of existence, been focused on ways to expedite resolution of Arizona's 2 general stream adjudications. So these are, as many of you probably know, decades-long lawsuits looking to resolve disputes over water rights in both the Gila and the Little Colorado watersheds. So 2 projects to watch for coming out of that. Sarah's in the process of working with the Decision Theater at ASU and creating some really amazing web-based visualization tools that will really help cities and towns look at issues from the state level and down regarding water resiliency. And in tandem with that, she is working on scorecards. Some of you may know her through this work with cities and towns also related to capacity and water resiliency. So she recently put out a report called The Price of Uncertainty that I would direct you to. You can find it on our website, morrisoninstitute.asu.edu. And the Price of Uncertainty report, it really, I think, exemplifies what we seek to do out of Morrison, which is to publish things in a very brief, which I know people appreciate, but concise, approachable, easy to get through format, so you can share it with your constituents, you can share it with policymakers alike. It's open to everyone. And that report is very much focused on what are the economic development consequences of leaving the adjudications unresolved. We also house the Latino Center for Public Policy, and when I mention this, I always point out to people this is not intended to be a resource for Latinos. This is meant to be a resource for everyone in understanding what it means that we have this growing demographic, whether that's looking at Latino educational achievement and its implications for median income in the state, or what it means to have an increasing set of Latino voters in the state. Let's see. I also want to give a shout out to Commissioner Andy Tobin, who is with us here today. You'll see on the slide, Andy runs the Arizona Legislative Academy, which is also positioned within the college and Morrison Institute. For those of you who are not familiar with this, this is sort of an onboarding policy primer that we host for newly elected Arizona state legislators. The inaugural one was held back in 2016. Andy's done just a phenomenal job with this program. We had a large cohort at that time, expecting another large cohort coming out of this upcoming election, and it showcased expertise from all three of the state universities and really put together an amazing set of documents to help be a primer for anyone. So I would say to all of you that that's accessible online, also on our website. We've archived all of, and this was about 4 days worth of content on everything from land policy to water policy to child welfare policy. So if you're interested, all of that's on our website. I also wanted to call attention to the annual event that we host, because it's going to be coming up this fall. So Morrison's signature event is the State of Our State Conference. This year will be November 19th. I invite all of you to join us. The topics rotate, so we've looked at things like criminal sentencing reform, we've looked at the rise of independent voters. Last year we were looking at disruptions to sort of futuristic thinking around disruptions in transportation and also workforce with automation. This year's topic, since it'll be held right after the midterm elections, we'll be looking at what we saw in terms of voter participation and the outcomes. And that leads into this next slide. So we have amassed a pretty substantial body of work in this space. We have done multiple reports looking at the increase in independent or non-affiliated voters, and the two most recent documents that you'll find on our website. One is called Arizona's Voter Crisis, looking broadly at the low voter participation that we've seen persistently happening here. We rank 43rd in the nation for voter participation turnout. And then more recently, we put out about a week ago a follow-up report to that looking at participation in primary elections in particular. Here are three more that I wanted to highlight just because I think they showed the breadth of what we do and what's accessible to you online. In addition to looking at the reports, we do a lot of presentations for community groups. We are happy to travel. I think I said before, we are statewide and we take that quite seriously. So if you would like to have one of our policy analysts come out and engage with the group in your community, we are very happy to do that. So the first one you'll see is called Finding and Keeping Educators for Arizona's Classrooms. This report has gotten a tremendous amount of media attention. It came out a year ago, May, but as you can imagine with Red for Ed and sort of the momentum around teacher pay, this report has gotten sustained attention. I would point out this report is not meant to be a teacher pay report, but it goes to show how something can really be a flashpoint when the timing sort of hits. So this has a lot of information around the sort of workforce production, who's coming into it, why people are exiting, a survey looking at job satisfaction among teachers, as well as information on where we rank nationally in teacher pay. The one in the center I point out because I think it's an excellent example of some of our more original research in partnership with a state agency. So this is called Child Neglect: Voices from Arizona's Communities. It is part of a major series we have that is funded by the Arizona Community Foundation looking at child neglect. So when ACF came to us as a funder and said we want to have an impact around child welfare and the well-being of children in the foster care system, we met with numerous people around the state, with policy experts, with practitioners, with social workers, and we were consistently hearing a need to better understand neglect. It was sort of the black box. 70% of the calls roughly going into DCS are neglect, not abuse, but there wasn't any deeper sort of subcategorization to help direct resources, especially around prevention, more strategically. So that's what that report sought to do. We had an excellent partnership with Department of Child Safety. They gave us access to 800 case files of individuals where neglect had occurred so that we could code them and put together a really substantial report. We were able to go and present that to the House Health Committee, the Senate Health Committee. It's research that our lead analyst has shared in 7 counties across Arizona. Again, we're happy to come out and speak with people in your communities. And the third one is a piece that came out of a contract we had with ADDPC, which is the Arizona Developmental Disabilities Planning Council. And I highlight this one because it has to do in particular with policy around transportation and access to transportation for individuals with developmental disabilities, which I know is an even bigger issue in rural parts of the state. Another one to highlight, you might have seen this. So David Berman, who some of you may be familiar with, is a senior fellow affiliated with Morrison Institute, a professor emeritus at ASU, and he recently worked with us to put out a brief that is looking at sort of the tension in state versus local government and the effects of SB 1487 that I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. So that's available on our website as a resource, and we are considering ways to perhaps do some additional follow-up survey work in that area. And then the last slide that I have is really capturing in one spot the types of services that we can offer if you're looking to partner with us. We do a lot of survey design and polling work, sometimes statewide, sometimes with a smaller group. We can regularly conduct focus groups. We can do program evaluation. We have a lot of expertise in community indicators. Right now, for instance, we have a partnership with Center for the Future of Arizona. Some of you might have seen their education progress meter, and we've done all of the data collection for that, and they are pushing it down to more localized offerings that might be of interest to you. I'll let you read some of these other ones. I point out citizen engagement. That's a place where we are happy to partner with you, whether that's hosting a public forum around a topic, providing an expert to be a speaker or panelist. We've also done things like the Citizens Initiative Review, which is a model for participatory democracy. And student-led projects. An example of that would be work we did with the city of Goodyear. We had a team of students from a studio course that were looking at how they could consider different public-private models of governance for a wellness park that they were going to be developing right along the I-10 in a flood basin. And I think those are my highlights. Jonathan, did you want to?
I'll just, quick word. So I've never seen the moderator tapped out mid-panel. And so I've got to finish, because if I don't finish now, the next Macho Man, Randy Savage, is going to tap in and hit me over the head with a chair. So a quick word just to mention. In each of these instances, let's take the Legislative Academy. That's a question where there was a need, a problem, that legislators were asked to start at 60 miles an hour and they got no training. And we took it upon ourselves, in some sense, to take responsibility and solve that problem. And Andy Tobin and I, sort of said, well, let's go and talk to a bunch of people and figure out what's needed, and came up with an answer. And there's all kinds of opportunities. We could go on at great length, which we won't. The only thing I'll say is, don't think of it just in our realm. So we have the W.P. Carey Business School, where you have groups supporting entrepreneurs in communities all over the state, helping young people, well, helping all people start businesses. Our School of Engineering has fantastic programs working with communities to build their own capacity and helping our students start companies in their communities. Again, bringing the capacity of the university to bear on problems. Our School of Sustainability has a fantastic collaboration with the City of Phoenix, figuring out how to make sustainability, how to make recycling economically sustainable, and make that work for the community as well. There really is no end to what the possibilities are. And let me make a confession. Universities have done a terrible job of explaining to the world what we do and how we can be of use. It's not surprising that people don't know what we do. That's on us. But it's not for a lack of desire, and it's not for a lack of commitment to public service. It's a challenge of communication and getting out there. So it's important for us to make the case that we're ready, willing, and able, and not, just as Jeff said, not to come and pontificate, but actually to sit down as a partner and learn together and be collaborators. So we're excited, and we are genuinely looking for those opportunities, and so we're eager to see what those things might look like, both with the folks in this room and those that you can share this message with. I think we'll leave it at that and see what we can talk about in conversation.
Hi, I'm not Len Amok anymore. The mayor had to step out and go to a nominating committee for the executive committee, which are my bosses at the League of Arizona Cities and Towns. My name is Lee Grafstrom. I'm the tax policy analyst with the League. I do have an MPA from ASU, class of 09. So
there you go.
What we are doing here today, I'd like to thank the speakers, Jeffrey, Jonathan, and Andrea. And at this point, let's turn it over and see if we have any questions from the audience. Sir.
My name's Dick Powell. I'm from Casa Grande. I can buy in some. Marvin Morrison was my dad's favorite ag student from Gilbert, Arizona years ago, and I've talked to Richard about it. And I was in 4-H for 7 years as a member and 7 years as a leader. So yeah. What I wanted to talk about today is in Pinal County, we have only junior colleges. We don't have any access to a baccalaureate degree for people that live there.
Right.
And the tuition is a factor that they can get an associate's degree for 2 years of school. And that usually, we have some really bright young people, and right. And a lot of them are, from, as you're saying, the medium lower to the lower income people that are probably first generation college entrants that die right there because they can't pay the tuition. It's too expensive to move forward from there. And the difference income-wise is about $20,000 a year between an associate's and a baccalaureate degree. We would like to see the possibility of either working with CAP or otherwise on a bare bones baccalaureate program without the frills, without the research, without all the other costs that would be affordable for these kids to do it. We have 3 or 4 big industries we've been blessed with that are planning to come in, and they want 2 things. They want a baccalaureate degree to even talk to you. And the other thing they want is the trades, vocational trade people. Those are the 2 things they're looking for. These kids that live in this county can stay at home, live with mom, have a job, do all those kind of things, and afford to go to CAC, but then to try to jump into one of the universities isn't going to happen for them, and it really penalizes a lot of bright, gifted young people that we have in our area. So if there's any way we could work with the college, somebody with the college to look into that, it doesn't seem like it would be that hard to create a special program, bare bones, baccalaureates, maybe 4 or 5 subjects, whatever, and integrate that into the CAC or a different one. We have the high school, we have an academy there from ASU, which is great. It's really good. And innovation, I know, is a key mark, and we're asking for your innovation in Pinal County regarding baccalaureate availability.
Right. Okay, Dr. Silvertooth.
Yeah, those are excellent points. Thank you. And as a matter of fact, there are some examples already existing in the state that have served as pilot programs for exactly what you're describing in recognition of those needs, not just in Casa Grande and Pinal County, but really across the state. A good example there is at Yuma right now. About 15 years ago, we recognized a similar need. Some folks in the Yuma community stepped up and expressed the same interests, concerns, and looked to partner with us. Interestingly enough, we have AWC in Yuma, and we also have a cooperative extension and our research experiment stations there. So we had a footprint with the university and the county already. That gave us a platform from which to begin to build some undergraduate degree programs in Yuma for the same reasons with the students there. And what we began with was a 2+2 articulation from AWC into the university. Then we went to 3+1, and now we have several degrees. And I can't remember exactly how many we have that can be offered from graduating from high school to completion of a bachelor's degree in Yuma. And it's been kind of a testing ground for us the past several years. NAU has a strong presence there as well in that campus, as well as ASU has joined that campus just in the past few years. So we see other places in the state. As a matter of fact, some of our colleagues with CAC in Pinal County, Central Arizona College, in between Casa Grande and Coolidge, has already stepped up, and there's an expression of an interest there. And one of the things that helps facilitate this, and I think all of our universities are rapidly moving into this arena, and that's the what we call online type courses, and it helps facilitate this types of education for students that are remotely based off the residential campus. As a matter of fact, we have a lot of students that are involved in international programs and military personnel involved in our online programs. So we're ramping up to help access education across the state. But again, the interesting irony there is our extension platform, extension network, has served as a foundational platform from which we can develop some of those programs, at least particularly to get them started. And then our resident education entities of the university have to step in and make those connections, make them there to last. But CAC is one of the logical ones, and also Eastern Arizona over in Safford. Many places we have those kind of community colleges usually are helpful in that sense. But you know, another important part of that is we can sit in this room and envision what we can do. Those community colleges have to step in and work with us there. And again, it's a matter of community partnership. And it's oftentimes it's a matter of who those people are and the relationships that we have in those communities and how we can all work together. But that's a very good point, and that's something I know we're working on for the University of Arizona. I see compatible similar programs from both NAU and ASU. Might just step back. I guess my history steps in here a little bit. What was about 20 years ago, the legislature in this state identified three major, areas of strength and focus for our three universities. And University of Arizona is defined as primarily a Research One university. It focused on that. NAU was for education with regard to particularly education of educators, potential educators. ASU was going to be a major urban university with broad access to a broader demographic in the state. And in a way, you kind of see a reflection of that was about 25 years ago that kind of orientation was developed. I think it wasn't just to the legislature, it was Board of Regents that identified that. But as a result of that, NAU, and they're not here to speak to this today, they became really the pioneers in our state with regard to reaching out to communities and establishing education programs for higher education in our communities. And we have, as the U of A, we certainly saw it in Yuma, have been kind of falling along behind, but they've also been great partners for us to work with. And I think that's one of the things that I could see from Jonathan and Andrea's comments before too, is I'm delighted to see in my time here in Arizona how all the universities are reaching out to become more public oriented and working together. And I look at it as this from the U of A. You know, we compete in basketball and football and sports and things like that, but I look at it like this. We're all here as public institutions with the same goal, the same customer. That's the people of the state of Arizona, and that's the people in your communities. And I think it's good to see what all of us can do to complement in a complementary way to meet the needs that you have. And you've brought up a very good point there.
A couple of quick comments, not to be repetitive. So as Jeffrey said, there are lots of ways in which we are doing that, and actually Vice Provost of ASU, Maria Hesse, is talking to Central Arizona College about replicating what we do at Arizona Western, what we do at Arizona Eastern, which is creating a pathway to have four-year degree programs available at some of the community college campuses. I think it's important. We've tried to figure out different models. So some people might know we have a campus in Lake Havasu, for example, to serve Western Arizona. It's a more affordable way for students to attend ASU. So I think that's an important part of the mix. but I want to push back a little bit at the premise because I think it's important. Because one of the challenges is that the belief about the cost of attending the university is not quite matched the reality. So for a student who is from a family earning less than $50,000, they will graduate from ASU without any debt. The affordability of the university is much, much greater than people realize, and a lot of times people assume that they can't go to college and assume that they can't afford it without actually investigating the facts. And so we need to overcome that, and we work with our community college partners on that, but it's an important message to get out into the community because I think it's widely misunderstood. And I'm not saying that the cost is not an issue, but I'm saying that it's much more accessible than it's believed to be. The strength of our community college is a huge asset for students who want to attain degrees. Our transfer policies at our university, but at other universities as well, are extremely strong, and we've forged very good partnerships with our community colleges so that literally every credit a student takes when they're in their first 2 years at community college applies towards their degree because they get on an articulation agreement. And so in a lot of states that's not true, and people waste a lot of time and money in classes that then don't count toward their bachelor's degrees. We as a state have largely, I wouldn't say solved it, but it's pretty much gone away. And a student can find out exactly what they need to take, and they can get an affordable first 2 years and get to the latter 2 years. But the last point I think is a really important one, which is why, and again, we have to do a better job of answering your question before it's even articulated. What is the value of going to a research university, whether it's ASU or U of A? Why is it worth the extra expense? And I think there's an answer to that. The answer is that being exposed to the generation of knowledge and working with faculty who are investigating problems is a substantively different experience. Doesn't mean that there's not value in attending a non-research university, but it's a substantively different experience, and it's beneficial to students. The reality of education in the 21st century is that you're probably not going to be using literally the things that you learn in college today 10 years from now, let alone 30 years from now. What you need to learn is the process of learning and the process of inquiry and investigation, and that's very tangible when you attend a place like ASU, which is now a world-class research university, competing at the highest level with all these universities around the world. It's different. It's a different education. It's not necessarily better or worse, but it's different, and I think it's relevant for the 21st century. So we've worked hard to make it accessible. Tuition hasn't gone up in several years, and so I'd urge people to investigate it. And by the way, Casa Grande's pretty close. We had a great opportunity working with Jim Thompson, your manager in Casa Grande. We've had Marvin Andrews, folks who commute back and forth from Phoenix to Casa Grande. So you don't necessarily lose somebody if they leave to go to school for a couple years. Anyway, we'll turn to the next question.
Yes, Mayor Doyle from the city of Nogales. I'm very glad to hear what you guys are saying. I just hope that you don't feel overwhelmed when Nogales comes to North.
Not at all.
Really partner up and bring, because we are one of the poor counties in the state, and it's not, you know, it's a big factor, you know, when you have most of your families that make under $28,000 in the city of Nogales, and it's effective. But I'll tell you one thing: I've realized that money is not everything, but there's a lot of things that we can. We're very careful with it, and we use it the right way, we can help a lot of these families. And I think the county, our county school superintendent out there, Mr. Velasquez, has done an outstanding job. He's really picked up the level of education, and also our Rio Rico schools are doing a great job with what they have. Yeah. We're very fortunate for the dedication of our teachers and our system down there, but we definitely want to partner up and bring in some of our deficits and needs, how we can improve them, and I think just by that support, I think we're going to do a lot better. But we will. We just don't want to overwhelm.
That's all right.
But I'm so grateful that you
overwhelm us. I'm ready to be overwhelmed.
You know, that you brought those things from the 1860s, because I had an elementary teacher that was born in 1870, and I guess she kind of shared some of probably Mr. Lincoln's direction back then. Of course, they were a lot stricter.
Yeah.
She was one of those strict teachers. That she worked till she was 85, and then shortly after passed away. But you know, I was glad. I'm fortunate to have some of those directives and principles and whatnot that they had back then. It's amazing now that we've changed so much, but I would like to see somebody still with those old, even those old-fashioned principles that really made you understand that you have to work hard. But what I like about now is this, that we're reaching out and we're making our students, our children, and we need to start even before K-12, preschool, and show them the confidence, the respect, and everything that goes along with it, so that they will work in that atmosphere. They'll strive to go forward. And I think that's what it's all about, to be inclusive and cut away those exclusive ideas of cliques, of bullying and stuff like that. We need to overcome those negative factors. So we'll be knocking on your door. Thank you
Very good. Thank you. That's a very good point. Matter of fact, if I may just comment to that, follow up with John. We didn't actually coordinate this before we started today, but what John offers is an outstanding segue in just a highlight of an example. In Nogales, in Rio Rico, with the school systems, Darcy Dixon, who's the Santa Cruz County Cooperative Extension Director there, is directing an outstanding set of programs that are preschool, early childhood education programs, partnering with the parents in the school systems. In fact, the school systems in Nogales and Rio Rico have actually opened up and contributed an entire school facility, a building, in each case. I think there are 3 of them in the Nogales community, John, that they're actually, that's what the programs that are being directed there are providing or serving, are these early childhood development programs. And they're programs that also don't just involve the children, but it's the parents. And it's those programs, as we look at our economic impact analysis of those types of programs, and that's just, we're just looking at the tip of the iceberg, but the potential impacts in communities like this, where this can be done, it's being done here in Phoenix, it's being done in Cochise County, several other Yavapai County, several other counties in the state. I wish we could do more, because the economic impact of those children in terms of the educational capacities they gain at that early preschool age are huge, and they replicate themselves throughout not only their lifetime and their educational achievement and their capacities, but also throughout their families and even in their communities. So we really, I wanted to take this opportunity to say that's a great example, and also I thank the school systems in Nogales and Rio Rico for reaching out and partnering with us and helping with that. But that just shows that it gives you an example of the kind of things that we can do right there. And there's a good example there, but we could do it, we could expand upon that. But those programs work, and I'm proud to see this. Thank you very much.
Right there, ma'am. Thank you.
I'm a city council or county council member, Duncan, Arizona, which is on the Gila River in Greeley County.
Yeah.
And I've worked closely with Extension. We've organized 2 master watersheds courses for our community.
Excellent.
Bill Brando and other faculty, and they've been wonderful. And I really value Extension's role in our rural community. What we've been finding recently is that our population is feeling traumatized by the Gila River education.
Yes.
And really quite unable even to begin to grapple with the policy issues and the historical foundations of what's happening to them now.
Yeah.
And because of that inability to grapple with it intellectually, some things are getting a little crazy.
Yeah.
It's starting to sound like a sagebrush rebellion in the making.
Yeah.
So I'm fascinated. I'm going to read up on the Morrison Institute, the Kyle Center. I didn't know about those. I'm really glad to hear about those, and I'll do my homework. But I just wanted to kind of cut to the chase and ask you, how can this rural community get involved at the table on policy, water policy in Arizona?
Right.
You want to answer?
Yeah. So the short answer is, let me get your card. I will pass it along to Sarah, because she has been convening people all over the state, and I have no doubt that she would follow up with you, and we can start that connection.
I'll mention one other thing, because I think one of the most interesting things about your observation is what's often left out is it's viewed as a technical issue or a legal issue, but it's a human issue. And how do people engage in a way that's constructive? One of the centers at ASU that engages this issue is something called the Decision Center for a Desert City, and a lot of it is about creating constructive engagement around water. And getting people from the point where they're ready to kill each other to actually they're ready to They're ready to come up with a solution. And so I think that's a powerful thing to recognize. That's part of the problem. People view it largely as an engineering problem or as a legal problem, which are real, but it's also a human a human being problem.
Absolutely.
And that's probably the hardest part. That honestly is probably the hardest part to solve.
Right. Yeah, I might just comment on that as well. Good points. But I appreciate you pointing out Bill Brandow. And Bill Brandow is a county director for Cooperative Extension in Graham County. He works closely with Kim McReynolds in Greenlee County, who has an office there not by your fairgrounds. And so you know those folks. But there's a good example, too, where Bill has actually brought into those communities issues, personnel and expertise from the campus to try to help working with the communities with these Gila River issues. But you know, we find with water issues all over the state, you know, we're in Arizona, so they're everywhere. They kind of take on a different complexion, different color wherever you go. But when you get into water, it's not always the engineering, it's not just the science. It's a combination of things. It is the people, but it's the culture, the history, the law, the economics, and all those things mixed in together. And the science comes out to be sometimes a very small piece of the puzzle. And along the borders, which Greenlee County is just with New Mexico, but not down the southern borders, but then you get into international law. And so things get kind of complex out there, but that's a good example too, where we're not here to say we can solve the problems, but we can work with the communities and try to help mitigate these issues. And I think there are great examples. I don't know if anyone is here from Cochise County. We have some unique water issues in Cochise County, as you know, and similar things happening in Mojave County, the opposite corner of the state here in the past few years. But everywhere you go in this state, and I'm glad to see what the Morrison Institute is stepping up to do, and I'm very familiar with those programs, and Richard as well. So we have good resources in this state through the Water Resource Research Center, the Morrison Institute, and I think all of us have the capacity too to reach out and more broadly than within our own state to help bring those resources to bear. But it does command the people working in the community before things blow up on us. And we've got some hot spots in this state, that's for sure.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, sir, back there.
I'm Marcelino Verona. I'm a member of the Nogales City Council, the Nogales Unified School District Governing Board, and the Santa Cruz County Provisional Community College Governing Board. And we have a partnership with Pima Community College where we have the 2+2, and it helps offer an array of bachelor's degrees and master's degrees, especially when we produce our own teachers. But we are a provisional community college, which means we have all the rights and privileges of any community colleges, with the exception that we cannot offer an Associate of Arts degree. So maybe the Morrison Institute can help us with some research, especially on the tax base, on how we can find our own pathway to accreditation. Because the students there, the community, we want to direct our own future as a community college and not so much rely on Pima Community College, which has been very helpful toward us. But maybe you could think of some ways, either through the University of Arizona, Eller School of Management, or the Morris Institute, where you could help us establish a pathway within the next 10 years so we can become our own accredited community college.
So that sounds like a great project to take on, and we'll definitely follow up with you. I'll just use it as an opportunity to follow on Jeff's answer on education, because I think it's an important one. I think one of the positives about the university's posture towards education as an issue is we don't view our responsibility as starting with when students arrive at the gates of the university. Mm-hmm. So Jeffrey talked about the work in Nogales. Actually, you mentioned in Casa Grande, ASU Prep campus. ASU Prep now has four campuses, and the reason why ASU decides to create charter schools is to show that this can be done. We don't expect to educate every person, but to show that K-12 education can be done in a way that creates opportunities for young people. So the question in Santa Cruz County is, not only how do we put Santa Cruz Community College on an accreditation path, but how do we do it in a way that creates a new model of community college education that serves the community in light of some of the challenges that have befallen other community colleges, whether it's Pima or elsewhere, and that is responsive to the needs of the community, which are different. I think that would be a powerful sort of opportunity, in some sense, to design the right institution for the moment, and we view that as our responsibility, because education is something that involves people whether they come to ASU or not, and so I think that's an exciting opportunity, and we'd love to follow up with you on that.
Similarly, I mean, we don't have that expertise within cooperative extension per se, but again, that's where we can serve as that portal to the university to help you connect with the right people, perhaps, as you say, in Eller or wherever that might be, to help you find that expertise that you might need and help solve your problem or address your problem effectively. Good example.
Okay, any more? Yes, over here. We've got just the guy for you, and he's sitting right back here, Dr. Ed Martin. He is your contact for the University of Arizona in Maricopa County, and he has personnel, as you well know, you've already encountered some of them through Master Gardeners, but we have expertise of people on campus that are working on those very issues you're asking about.
And there's almost too much to say in terms of resources, but the School of Sustainability is engaged with the City of Phoenix. We actually have a tree growing program within the School of Sustainability, and Chuck Redmond, who's in that school, is one contact. We'll follow up afterwards, but this is a big area. In fact, I was actually just talking to some other people of why don't we have a program which employs people as a gateway back to their own personal sustainability, growing trees, giving them skills in agriculture, so maybe we can avail ourselves of the extension services, and so they're learning a skill, gaining opportunity for employment, and also figuring out how to create more trees to keep our cities a little bit cooler these days. So yes.
All right, do we have any more? All right, then we're going to get out a little bit early. I'd like to thank the members of the panel for a very interesting conversation. Oh, do we have another question? No? Yes? Yes, sir. Back there.
Yeah, Jorge Maldonado, also Nogales City Councilman. You guys used to have, Jeffrey, you guys used to have with Nogales a very good relationship in the produce industry. Back then, Dr. Norm Hopper and Merrill Jensen used to create the clubs that used to come down to Nogales and collaborate with all the produce houses and all that.
Right.
You know, we're the gateway crew.
Yes.
Where produce grow up in winter.
Right.
And not just produce, you know, the maquiladoras and all that.
Right.
You know, and there's a lot of opportunity for you, even your students.
Right.
You know, I was 13, 14 years old, and I was touring U of A students and all that.
Right.
Going through college and learning the aspects of the produce industry.
Yeah.
You got marketing, you got international trade, you got you know, produce knowledge, post-harvest, pre-harvest.
Right.
You know, I'm a agronomist. You know,
Yeah.
you got all that. How come you guys haven't done that?
That's a good question. Actually, you mentioned Merle Jensen, and this is a good example, too, of the kind of sometimes the ephemeral nature of some programs that are directly associated with the individuals that are directing them. Merle retired a few years ago, and Merle, people, we're all going to be replaceable. The graveyard is full of indispensable people, but Merle left, and we haven't had anyone that's really stepped into that role. But we have other things that have kind of filled the void in a different way. For example, in Santa Cruz County, working with the Fresh Produce Association of the Americas, who actually oversee and have worked with all the companies bringing, I forget how many millions of tons of metric tons of fresh produce in the United States every year from Mexico through that wet portal at Nogales. They have a lot of material that is left over. Sometimes it spoils in the trucks waiting for inspection. And so one of the questions that the Fresh Produce Association of the Americas had is, what do we do with all this material? You take it to the Santa Cruz County dump, and then that creates problems with flies and other things. So they're working with a composting program, and a group of students have come down from the campus. Now they're based in Santa Cruz County. They call themselves the Compost Cats, but they've joined our group. They've become a part of Extension, so we've moved them to Santa Cruz County to partner with the Fresh Produce Association of the Americas for that very reason. And through that program, we're beginning to reconnect some of these affiliations or these exposures of our students on campus that are interested in sustainability, environmental science, horticulture, et cetera, field production, and marketing. And they're beginning to get reform these connections. But direct answer to your question, when Merle Jensen left, he took everything, his connections, his knowledge base, his drive for that program with him. And sometimes it takes a while to replace those individuals because they're key. But this is one of the ways that we're doing it, and it's a good example right there of that partnership with the Compost Cats. It just freshly started. I'd encourage you to go by our office and meet with Darcy, and you meet with Chester Phillips, who's directing that program with a whole horde of students they have working down there. But hopefully I think we're making progress, but hopefully we can help that association address that problem. And it looks like it's working so far pretty well. It's a good example. Good question. Thank you, sir.
All right. Anybody else? No? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you to the panel. Thank you.